Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, who flirts with the Republicans on a regular basis, the most moderate of all of the Democratic senators, announced this morning that he will be voting for Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination on the United States Supreme Court, effectively ending any drama that might surround her ascension to the Supreme Court. So that is basically a done deal, barring some sort of crazy revelation, which it's hard to imagine what that would entail. So that will happen in early April. She will replace Judge Stephen Breyer when the court term ends. So I do think that the Republicans scored a lot of points politically, further elucidating the argument for why Republicans in the midterm make so much sense. But in terms of what is going to happen to her in her nomination, she is effectively on the Supreme Court with that announcement from Joe Manchin. And now the only drama, to the extent that there's drama at all, will be to what extent will Republicans support her nomination? How many Republicans will she get? 2, 3, whatever that number is.
What's your number,
really
Clay?
Matter. I'm going to go, I think Susan Collins in Maine is going to end up voting for her. I think that there may well be a couple of guys who are resigning. Resigning is the wrong word. Who are retiring from the Senate who could consider her. I think it's going to be 2. I think there will be 2 Republicans that end up voting for her. What about you?
I'll go 4.
You think 4?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that the drama, that there will be a lot of attention paid to how, quote unquote, bipartisan the voting is. But once Manchin came out and said, and we talked about this, Buck, I mean, there was maybe a small chance that he could use this as an opportunity to announce effectively that he's becoming a Republican. But these are the consequences, and I think they're fairly significant, of the runoff elections in Georgia, because Judge Breyer would not have stepped down if Republicans had control of the Senate. I really don't believe that he would have, and there wouldn't have been any sort of massive pressure campaign on him to step down, meaning that you would continue at 6'3", but with an 80-plus-year-old. And, Buck, if you look, I mean, positive news, Clarence Thomas came out of the hospital today. He's been released. He's back home, hopefully, back to being normal and recovering. But when you've got people over the age of 70 who are on the Supreme Court, as we saw with Antonin Scalia, at any point, that's how life works, you might have an unexpected death. And that, by the way, could happen in the Senate as well, where you have a lot of older individuals, politicians who are representing the Republicans and the Democrats. So
I also think the Republicans are not scared of the Democrats the way that we might have anticipated in terms of the backlash against going after Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think one of the big takeaways from this whole week of the confirmation hearings is that if the Democrats weren't in a place where they're writing think pieces, and they are right now, about how their side is making it too easy, this was in the New York Times, too easy for Republicans to just gain ground with independents, to gain ground, not just with the Republican base, but with people who will be determining factors in the next midterm, in the midterm election, and then, of course, going forward to the presidential election after that. They're making it easy in the sense that they're failing on so many levels. Their poll numbers are terrible. Biden looks like an absurdity with each passing day, more like an absurdity with each passing day. And so the usual, I can't ask tough questions of this, the first, soon to be, I think, the first black female Supreme Court justice. Republicans were not actually scared to ask questions, even at the expense of being called unfairly racist by the Democrat media, or sex, or both, obviously. And I think that's just indicative of they aren't really worried about where the Democrat Party is at right now. They don't feel like people that are persuadable will see asking real questions and being willing to push back a bit on what was supposed to be just a glide-through process here of a confirmation. GOP is feeling like they can actually push a bit. And I think it was honestly, it was more than I expected to see this week.
Yeah.
It was on a number of levels. There was obviously the Marsha Blackburn question over what is a woman? Speaking of think pieces, I said this to you. Do you see now, this is USA Today think piece, as much as you could call it that. And it's amazing. Health and wellness under USA Today. Marsha Blackburn asked Ketanji Brown Jackson to define woman, Science says there's no simple answer.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm gonna disagree with that opinion piece. I do think you're right. And I think this is consequential. Once you acknowledge that you're 100% not going to get honest treatment from the media, I think that's liberating in some way to say exactly what you think as a politician. Because when you know that the Washington Post editorial board is going to come out and say Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was treated worse than Judge Brett Kavanaugh in the hearings, there's no point of even arguing otherwise. This is an unpersuadable, dogmatic, propagandist organization that has been created. And I do think that's an important point, because so many people are so afraid of Twitter, and they're so afraid and worried about whether they're liked or not, that it leads to, even for politicians, certainly for high-powered executives and people in positions of power, many people are afraid to say what they actually think for fear of what the reaction will be. And the media has so given up any notions of fair play that I don't think Republicans fear what the Washington Post is going to say or what the New York Times is going to say. And in many ways, they recognize that those attacks that they're going to get for doing their jobs just serves to further buttress the overall support that is out there. That's why I always say, Buck, I don't care if people come after us for things that we say on the show, because the people who attack us just make the people who like us more. And that is the world that we're in now.
I also think that the base of the Republican Party, I have a number of people that are friends of mine who are very much, I think, in line with the base. And they'll often send something to me and say, what's the point of the GOP? That's the line of frustration. You know, why do we even do this if they will cave on the following? I feel like this week the GOP decided, all right, they have the votes, but we know what the Democrats would do. They would make this a real confirmation process. They would ask questions that might rattle this soon-to-be Supreme Court nominee and would at least show the public that you do have, as Tom Cotton pointed out, by the way, a far left activist. That's actually what he said. Senator Tom Cotton decided that he was just going to say it, Clay. He didn't care that, the media would attack him.
I do think Republicans will be united in opposition. I would imagine there are some Democrats who are very concerned about her giving a 3-month sentence to a convicted child sex predator who had dozens of graphic images on his computer, and then 6 years later he comes back in front of her again, and she gives him 6 months in a halfway house. There's also the fact that she says she can't define what a woman is, or she blatantly disregarded immigration law to try to stop President Trump from enforcing our border. She's a far less left activist. She always has been.
I think it's good that the American people know something about who this Supreme Court justice is, other than some of the, the obvious characteristics and background and resume, which is, how Biden picked in the first place.
I think also, Buck, the accusations of racism and sexism don't land anymore. Because when you brand everything as racist and sexist, it doesn't work. And let's be honest, if you really want to talk about direct racism, Joe Biden saying, I'm picking a black woman, and specifying during the political campaign that he was going to pick a black woman, thereby eliminating 94% of the American population from consideration for this particular job, is the very foundation of racism. And you're making a choice entirely based on race, which is, at its essence, racism. And the American public disagreed, I believe. And I think this deserved to be even argued even more maybe than the Republicans did. That takes away from the legitimacy of Ketanji Brown Jackson's ultimate appointment to the Supreme Court. Because if Joe Biden had done what Donald Trump did and put out a list of 20 judges that he was considering and said, these people are all worthy of the Supreme Court, I'm going to pick someone off of this list, and then he had picked Ketanji Brown Jackson as one of those 20, people wouldn't say the only reason you picked her is because she's a woman and she's black. But when you said, I'm going to put a black woman on, you automatically undercut the legitimacy of your own choice.
And there's a reason he did this. It was because that's what was best for Joe Biden. Because he was trying to get help from the African-American community during the primary So he made it, from Democrat voters, and he made it an explicit quid pro quo, essentially. Hey, I'll do this, give me more votes, and also wanted to make it clear that he is taking credit for this in advance of doing it, right? So it was, if you just did it, Clay, then afterwards, of course, I'm the president who appointed the first black female Supreme Court justice. But the whole time it's been, we know we can count on Joe because the moment that, he gets the opportunity. So he wanted to cash in on it early. It was all about what was best for Joe Biden is the point. Because if it was what was best for not just the process, but also, honestly, for Ketanji Brown Jackson, he would have done exactly what you said. Lay out who he thinks the varsity team is, so to speak, and then pick the all-star. Then pick the person that he thinks is the best. Instead, he narrowed it down to, I think we've done the math, 3% of the population overall, not even of the legal profession.
Yes, 6% of the overall population are black women. And then, Buck, I think it's 1.8% of attorneys are black women. So, meaning, I'm doing live math on the air, which everybody knows.
No, that's right.
98.2% of all attorneys were not considered for this seat. Which is pretty wild to think about. And look, that's self-evident because he only had 3 or 4 people to even interview, right? There are only 3 or 4 people who were judges that were on the level that could even be considered for the Supreme Court.
Do you agree with me, by the way, that you think affirmative action as a general, this is not specifically affirmative action, although there are obviously some discussions about how it relates to affirmative action. Do you think that it's going to get struck down?
Yeah, I do.
This June in the next cycle? I think which will be a fascinating way that plays out across the country. Depends on, obviously, the breadth of the decision and whether we're right or not, but that will be interesting.
I think it will, and then there'll be an immediate attempt from all of these woke corporations and universities to, again, define affirmative action effectively in some way that doesn't quite fit the criteria that has been struck down by the Supreme Court. That's the reality.
I remember when I was an undergrad at Amherst College, the president of the school at the time held a forum, and he had properly named, his last name was Marks. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was well named. So he held a forum on affirmative action, and he let the student body know. This was Grutter v. Bollinger, when it looked like the first time around it might. He said, basically, don't worry. Whatever the Supreme Court does, we're still going to give certain minorities benefits in the application process and just find a way to cover it up. He was open. He was pretty open about it at the time.
I think that's likely to occur no matter what, even if the Supreme Court strikes it down. Now,
it'll be fun to say it's illegal, though, right, Clay? It'll be fun to be like, it's illegal, everybody, to do this stuff.
And by the way, vast majorities of people of all different races now disagree with the concept of affirmative action as the way it's being implemented today. So this is not something that is popular in any way, but big picture, as we roll into the weekend after the biggest, I would say, most significant news coming out of Washington in terms of political news, Ketanji Brown Jackson is going to be elevated to the Supreme Court early in April. She'll be confirmed, and then she'll take over when Justice Breyer steps down.
More left-wing than Sotomayor from the bench, or about the same?
I don't know. Honestly, this is one of those things where she's been such a stealth candidate. It's hard to even get a great read on what her opinions are going to be. Certainly more left-wing than Breyer, who could be at times very conciliatory in terms of the way that he felt his job as a justice existed. Breyer was at least cognizant in some way of business. I don't think Ketanji Brown Jackson will. I think she'll be. I think she won't be as left-wing as Sotomayor. I think she'll be somewhere to the left of Sotomayor, closer to Kagan.
The old left believed in using the system to achieve power and to use power through the system. The new left, just power. Whatever you got, whatever end state you want, whatever situation could get you there, that's the way it goes. The law is just kind of an impediment.